first, we have the top story. Yes. At least 50 people have been killed after explosions have been reported in multiple cities in Ukraine, according to an advisor to the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr, not Vladimir, Volodymyr Zelensky. U.S. President Joe Biden condemned Russia for launching the military strike in Ukraine on Thursday and announced a whole new set of sanctions and limitations on exports to Russia. He added that 27, count them, 27 EU members and G7 members will also participate in these sanctions. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, who is like the Jerry Lewis, apparently, of Ukraine. So imagine Jerry Lewis, the comedian, becoming president of the United States. But now he's not laughing because he severed diplomatic ties with Russia as his country, faced a wide-scale military attack. He spoke as one of his advisors announced that more than 40 Ukrainian soldiers had died and dozens were wounded. I'm sure since yesterday that number is probably, multiplied. Now, Russia itself has been under Western sanctions since its 2014 annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. More punitive measures were added after a former Russian spy was poisoned in Britain in 2018. Russia has denied any involvement in that, and following an investigation into allegations denied by Moscow of Russian meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election won by Donald Trump. Now, Russia has seized control of an airport near Kiev. They are marching towards Kiev or Kyiv, depending on what channel you watch. Russian helicopters have attacked Antonov International Airport, a military airport in Hostomel near the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, or Kyiv, on Thursday, according to the Ukrainian officials. The Interior Ministry has confirmed that Russian troops have seized control of the airport. Airborne troops were filmed on the ground patrolling the perimeter by CNN reporters. They have also captured the Chernobyl nuclear plant. I don't know why anybody would want to capture that. Keep it 100. From what I've heard, if you go near there, that you'll grow a third head or something. To go with, yeah. But anyway, an advisor to the Ukrainian presidential office, Mikhailo Polodyak, said on Thursday that Russian troops have captured the Chernobyl power plant, the site of the world's worst nuclear accident. The plant is located approximately 60 miles north of the Ukrainian capital of Kiev/Kyiv. Polodyak said that the status of the plants and storage facilities is unknown. Now, the backlash to this, as Joe Biden alluded to in the intro, are massive. The Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, said that Germany is halting the certification of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia. Boris Johnson has said that the UK is imposing sanctions on 5 Russian banks. And so this has turned into an absolute mess, Rev. You've been watching this. What have you been thinking of the coverage and what's been going on in Kyiv?
Well, I have noted that the Ukrainians are not just lying down and, giving in.
Nah.
I'm reminded of the fact that it's one thing to go into a country. You can go into a country pretty quickly and achieve, I guess, what one would call an operational victory. It's another thing to be able to hold that other country.
Right.
And these Ukrainians do not appear to be interested in being under Moscow's domination at all.
Yeah,
and they know that Russia has the technologically superior military. They know that Russia has numbers on its side, and they're like that mouse. Have you ever seen the T-shirt, "The Last Act of Defiance"?
No. Which one is that?
It's a T-shirt has on it a picture of a mouse standing on the ground.
Right.
And there's an eagle about to plunge on him. And the mouse stands there holding one hand in the air. And on that hand, one finger.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. I can only imagine. Well, see, here's the thing. The issue that I will always have is that the mainstream corporate media is always very biased in how they're handling this. This has actually been going on. This has been escalating since about 2014.
Yeah.
Those regions, in the Donbass region, Donetsk and Lugansk, these are both basically they have a lot of Russians there. It's primarily Russian speaking, and they are home to a lot of rebels, and they've actually wanted to be independent from Ukraine for a while, and they've been fighting with Kiev. About 14,000 people have died in this war since 2014. And so I think a lot of people don't understand like where the genesis of this comes from. And if you listen to Vladimir Putin's speech, his long-form speech that he gave, there's actually some clues in there. Him and a lot of Russians believe that the Russians and Ukrainians are the same people. They were all part of that Rus, the Rus people, the Rus Empire. The Russians were called the Great Russians, and the Ukrainians were called the Little Russians. And they believe the same thing about the Belarusians, which are, in Belarus, who seem to have a little bit more of a amenable relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. And so that's where the name of their country, Belarus, comes from. They're white Russians. Belarus means white Russians. Now, when Russia became a Tsardom in 1547, the official shortened title of the Tsar was Tsar Svaya Rus, or Tsar of all the Russias. That's Belarus, that's Russia, that's Ukraine. All those Russias stem from the successor states and principalities of the original Kievian Rus, that was ruled over by various members of the Rurikid dynasty, the Viking rulers of the 9th century. That dynasty originated in Novgorod and moved its capital to Kiev, or Kyiv, back in 882. So this is 9th century we're talking about here. This is how long these people have been tied together. That became the grand capital of the Berkid Federation. In comparison, Moscow, which is now considered one of the major cities in the world, in Europe, was a complete backwater at this point. Its first recorded mention only comes about in around 1147. So a lot of people have, and this is because the corporate media sort of has the brainworms. They have these brainworms where they essentially cover everything as either capitalist or communist or socialist. They think Vlad wants to go back to the Soviet Union. Okay? And that's how they're covering. That's how CNN's covering it. That's how the mainstream media is covering. When what they don't understand is that Vlad thought that Lenin and other Soviet leaders made a mistake by ever breaking up, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. He wants to go back before the Soviet Union to the Rus, the Russian Empire.
To the empire.
Yes, to the Russian Empire. Okay, and so that's his ultimate.
So he wants to be czar.
He wants to be czar of all the Rus.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Czar Vlad.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but ultimately, these regions, more than anything, the thing that really exacerbated this was in 2014, Barack Obama, our favorite president on this show, of course, and Joe Biden, our second favorite president on this show, they backed a right-wing neo-Nazi-led coup to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine in 2014 that extended the U.S. sphere of influence up to Russia's borders. And obviously Vlad did not like that. That's what precipitated a lot of this. Joe Biden himself was the architect of this ousting of the leader who had 90% support. And they used the Azov Battalion, which has been called neo-Nazis. If you guys Google the Azov Battalion, you can see pictures of them with John McCain and people like that. And if you see other pictures of them, they're literally holding Nazi flags. So, I mean, this has been known for a long time that the U.S. backed the neo-Nazis in Ukraine in 2014. And let's not forget his son, Hunter Biden. Okay, after this, his son ended up on the board of energy company Burisma, and there was a Minsk agreement that was supposed to sort of be an appeasement, a sort of a treaty, a peace treaty. And at that point, the Ukrainians, encouraged by the United States, said, forget that, and continued bombing the civilians in Lugansk and Donetsk, which are these breakaway regions that have wanted to be away from Ukraine for a long time. Now, they have essentially said that they were vindicated because they've been telling people, oh, Vlad's going to invade for weeks. But what they haven't been saying is that in those regions, Russian forces were already there in Donetsk and Lugansk. They were already there, and they've been there for many years. They also are not talking about the fact that the company formerly known as Blackwater, known as ZE, which is XE, spelled XE, led by Eric Prince, who is Betsy DeVos's older brother. Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. Betsy DeVos, Donald Trump's Secretary of Education, her brother was the guy from Blackwater that was in New Orleans during Katrina. Everybody should Google that. Google Blackwater in Hurricane Katrina. There's a lot of interesting things that will show up. But yeah, his mercenaries have been in Ukraine for many years. Now, what does all this have to do with any of the tea in China, as they say? What does that have to do with the tea in China? This war could have been avoided if two things had happened. If the Biden administration and NATO had simply acknowledged that Russia had legitimate security concerns regarding Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. Okay?
Well, wait a minute, though.
Right.
Well, no, finish your sentence, because I do have a question on that particular point. The history in that part of the world is deep. You're right. But the history of NATO versus the Warsaw Pact is fairly recent.
Right.
And that history, I mean, if you look at NATO's structure, its operational doctrines throughout the years, even its current activities, NATO is primarily a defensive alliance. Now, I get, for Russia or whatever its permutations, which actually in this
case, they weren't in Libya. They weren't defensive in Libya.
Which I always thought was weird. The whole NATO being in Libya, NATO being in Iraq, that's outside of NATO's area of operation.
It's supposed to be.
Right. And so I always looked at that as, because it happened after the Soviet Union fell, that those were things of NATO trying to find a reason to justify its existence.
Yep.
Well, we don't have the Soviet Union to defend against, but we've made all these investments and everything, so let's turn us into the world police force.
Yep.
But right now we're dealing with something that really does strike at the heart of why NATO exists. And here's the thing. Other than, like I said, the aberrations that you and I just mentioned, NATO's primary operational philosophy has been defensive. It's always assumed that they were there to keep Russia from advancing west. Now, another thing about that, Russia has, or Putin, and so did Stalin before him, they've long talked about the threat to Russia's security from the West. They would cite Napoleon. Then after World War II, they cited Hitler. But here's the thing. Nobody from the West has ever conquered Russia.
Has anybody ever conquered Russia, period?
The Mongols, maybe.
Oh, my man Genghis?
Yeah. So if they should be worried about anybody, seemingly, based on history, it ought to be their buddies in Beijing, in China.
Well, apparently they have an understanding. But here's another way this could have been avoided. And this hasn't even really been talked about a lot. Vladimir Putin, when he first got in power in, I want to say 99 or 2000, talked to Bill Clinton about Russia possibly becoming a part of NATO.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, like, people forget about that. And Bill Clinton played him off, and essentially he sort of brushed them off, and that led Vladimir Putin to believe that the whole purpose of NATO was to be against Russia.
Be against Russia.
Yeah. So, and then they kept moving they kept moving NATO eastward after they said they wouldn't in 1990 with that agreement to reunify Germany. They kept moving them eastward anyway, and so Vlad's sitting over there going like, "What the hell is going on here? These people are coming for me." And like Vlad is, I don't want to. He's not insane, okay? Like, this is another thing I hate that the corporate American media does. They make everybody out to be Hitler or some guy. Hitler was a guy who was a strict ideologue who wanted to cleanse the entire earth of an entire ethnic group full of people. Okay, he was high on crystal meth half the time, or the equivalent of crystal meth half the time. Like, he was out of his mind, literally. Vladimir Putin is a guy who is an authoritarian. He is an authoritarian, and he is a little bit paranoid, but with NATO's actions,
and he's got delusions of grandeur.
And he's got delusions of grandeur. I'm reminded of I wanted to, because I saw this the other day, and I wanted to write this down too. And George Kennan, okay. He was the architect of the Soviet containment strategy, and he was the former ambassador to the Soviet Union, okay? Mm-hmm. In 1997, now this was after the fall of communism, after the fall of the Soviet Union. This was the late 90s, after the U.S. had helped put Boris Yeltsin in charge. He wrote in the New York Times that expanding NATO would be the most fateful error in American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. Mm-hmm. He said such a decision may be expected to inflame the nationalistic, anti-Western, and militaristic tendencies in Russian opinion, to have an adverse effect on the development of Russian democracy, to restore the atmosphere of Cold War to East-West relations, and to impel Russian foreign policy in directions decidedly not to our liking. Now, this guy said this in 1997. Mm-hmm. He understood that the more that they went eastward, and he warned them, he warned Bill Clinton, he warned all of them, do not keep going eastward. They are going to, Putin wasn't even in charge at this point, but he said essentially they are moving NATO eastward as a way to humiliate the former Soviet Union or Russia now. Mm-hmm. And eventually some leader is going to come into power and is going to take that slap in the face and use it to inspire, I guess, what we're seeing right now, which is just an all-out invasion of supposedly a state that we want to. Well, we don't even want Ukraine and NATO. That's the thing. We don't even.